Yeah, so in Colossians chapter 3, the text says in verse 3, all right, for you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Now, again, I'd like to know what kind of death that was. And I'm going to talk about the body a little bit too, because he kind of spoke about that a lot. I'll give you some text that he hasn't responded to yet. When Christ, who is our life, appears. Now, wait a minute. What is your life? It's Christ. When Christ, who is our life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Now, look at it. They had died, and so they get life. What life? Christ. That's their life. Why? Because Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. But he also said their life was hidden. They weren't physically hidden. So what kind of manifestation was it going to be? It wasn't going to be a physical one. But they would appear with him in glory. So whatever was hidden is what is revealed. And that's not some physical aspect of your nature. All right? But let's go to a resurrection text. Let's go to Romans chapter 8. And talk about the body just a little bit and redemption. Remember, he's got redemption all at the cross. He says that if we claim redemption takes place after the cross, we are denigrating the sacrifice and the atonement of Christ. That statement doesn't reflect on the priesthood and the typology of the priesthood. Now, let me say this. By no means are we denying the efficacy of Jesus' sacrifice. We're simply saying that the manner in which it is applied is not completed, either at his death, when he said it was finished, because what he's really dealing with there is the Passover was finished, because Christ died as our Passover. In the work as high priest, he had to complete that work. And that work is not completed, or was not completed, until his return. That's what Hebrews 9:26 through 28 is all about. But anyway, here's Romans 8. So let's talk about the body a little bit. The Bible says, so then those who are in the flesh cannot please God. But you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God dwells in you. Now, if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, he is not his. And if Christ is in you, the body is dead. So now, if we're going to talk about the body, what body is that? I asked Michael Holloway, was his physical body dead? I asked him, was Christ in him? I know in one of our conversations we've had. So look at that. If Christ is in you, the body is dead. Now, I think everybody on this call believes Christ is in them. Paul wrote this to the church in Rome and told them that if Christ was in them, the body is dead because of sin, but the spirit is life because of righteousness. Now, this dead body, he says he was going to give life. If Christ is in you, the body is dead because of sin, but the spirit is life because of righteousness. Either way, we've got a dead body. See, we've had a lot of death that we spoke about tonight. And it wasn't about physical bodies. If the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his spirit who dwells in you. Now, we have the word bodies here in the plural. I would suggest that we're looking at two bodies, if we're going to look at it in the plural. And that would be the Jew and Gentile who are brought together as one body in Christ. I know he went to Philippians chapter 3 to talk about the body there. And he used it in the plural, but it's not in the plural in Philippians chapter 3. It's in the singular. It is the body of the humiliation of us. That's the literal rendering of the text. But further, the text says here, Not only that, but we also who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for what? The adoption, the redemption of our body. So whatever the adoption is, that is the redemption of the body. Now, I'll tell you what Kenneth Gentry said on this text on Romans 8, 10, and 11, and Romans 8, 23. He said that was parallel to the resurrection body in 1 Corinthians 15. And I agree. But the problem is, this body that was spoken of in this text was not physically dead. So that doesn't work for him too well in 1 Corinthians 15. All right. The next text I'll look at, let's go to Philippians 3 for just a moment. I won't spend a lot of time there. I'm just going to point out a couple of things. Number one, here is Paul saying that I may know him in the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, if by any means I might or may attain to the resurrection from the dead. Now, this word resurrection in this text is the ex anastasis. It means the resurrection out from the dead one. So not the resurrection of the dead or from the dead, meaning those who were considered as the dead ones, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, etc. This was a resurrection taking place out from the dead. And in verse 21, for who will transform our lowly body? Well, this is actually the body of the humiliation of us. You can look it up in the Greek and you can see that. See, that word tapinosis is the word humiliation. So it was the body of their humiliation that would be raised, not a physical body. And let me go back to the Greek here. To the English. But here's the deal, just so you can see the connection. If you go to chapter 3 and look at that verse is continued in the 4th chapter, where he talks about their names being in the book of life. That's an eschatological motif. And then he says, let your gentleness be known to all men, the Lord is at hand. So whatever the resurrection body was there, it was going to be raised, or the consummation of it would take place at the return of the Lord, which was at hand. And remember, Holloway says at hand means, or that the coming of the Lord was at hand in the 1st century. Now, he's going to deny that this one has a reference to the to 70 AD. But I've asked him for his hermeneutic that will prove that. What do we find in this text that tells us or distinguishes between the coming in Matthew 24:30? Nothing. The only thing he can say is that it doesn't mean that. Well, if it doesn't mean at hand for them, then how does he get the double reference at hand? Because, see, that's his argument. His argument is it's at hand for them, and therefore fulfill, it was imminent, shortly to come to pass, and therefore it's at hand for us. But that's about 2,000 years between the two. Let's see. Is there anything else? Okay, the new covenant. Another statement he made was that the... I was going to talk on the last days for just a moment, just very quickly, and we can do this quickly. All right, on the last days in Genesis 49, first of all, the last days is regarding the 12 sons of Israel. So he tells them what's going to happen to them in the last days. And then in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, the last days cover the time that Jesus speaks or spoke when he was on earth, which was before the day of Pentecost. And it was before he died on the cross that he spoke. And so it says, in these last days, is spoken to us by his son. And from this perspective, Christ's ministry was in the last days. It even says that he died in the last days, and it says he died in the end of the age. So from that perspective, the last days were the last days of the age of Moses. And if we go back to the text that we were looking at before in Matthew 24 and verse 3, that he has already admitted is the destruction of the temple. Matthew 24 and 3. Let's see, Matthew 24. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming? Notice now, and the end of the age. Well, those were the last days of that age. If this was the end of the age, which he admits happens in 70 AD, then they had to be in the last days of the age of Moses. Now, do they go from one last days period into another? Yeah, Paul. I've been hesitating all night about presenting that information because it definitely puts it in perspective. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? All right, so there you have the end of the age. That's what he said happened in 70 AD. That age came to an end. Well, where is there another age? Let's take a look very quickly, and then I might end up with some of the information that Paul is talking about, and we'll be done. Here's one. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 11 says, all these things happened to them as examples. They were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. So they are telling you, Paul is telling you right there in the first century, that the end of the ages came upon them. So when you look in Luke, the text that Justin Martyr quoted, along with all those other passages, Matthew 16, 27 and 28, Matthew 8, 11 and 12, resurrection passages, coming of the Lord passages, he put them all together. But notice in this text, verse 34 and 35, the sons of this age marry. Now, what age were they in? They weren't in the Christian age when Jesus wrote that, or when he stated that. They were not in the Christian age. So he said the sons of this age. Now remember, Micah Holloway is documented in saying Matthew 24:3 is the end of the age connected with the fall of the temple, and that would be the end of the age of Moses. I don't know if he has another age in there, because he says the law ended at the cross. So was that the end of an age? And then you got another one in AD 70. I'm not sure how he really puts that together, because he's kind of sketchy on his eschatology. And then he's got this age, which he calls an evil age, that's not going to end until the alleged future coming of Christ. And then we get another age after that. So I'd like for him to define all these ages, or at least give me some clarification on what is the age that passed away and what age to come. What is the age that followed it? Was it the age to come that the Bible speaks about?